introduce Mark Spracklen for today's meeting of the Telecom Profitability Interest Group of PACE. And Mark's back again to lead a discussion on forecasting revenue and using this to set prices, typical issues and solutions. I'm sure this is an issue that many, maybe most organizations face. I think there's a lot we can learn from him today. So without further ado, Mark, thank you for being here and take it away.
All right. Yeah, thanks a lot for joining. Normally when we have these sessions, we talk about profitability. And when you talk about profitability, everyone thinks immediately about cost. But often what we find is actually getting reasonable, accurate revenues is just as hard as getting costs, sometimes even harder, especially the forecasting bit, surprisingly. So let me get started, and I'll go through some of the issues. First of all, my three-legged cross diagram again. This is what we typically find in telecoms operators. Three competing areas, with finance trying to cut costs, engineers, product guys trying to build the best network, regardless of costs or revenues, and then the customer-facing marketing people trying to increase revenues, but often they've got a very short-term view of revenues because of their KPIs. They're normally rewarded yearly, so they don't take a long-term view. Whereas the product guys, the engineers and that, they do. So they're looking to see what's the next best technology and planning for that. So you really need to take into account these three main areas. Starting with costs, because we are talking about profitability, most models we find are historic, which really isn't much use when we want to set prices, because we don't care what happened last year. We care what's going to happen next year or this year. And the cost side is actually normally quite straightforward because companies have a budget or a 5-year plan. And this is normally reasonably detailed for costs. You know, they know how many staff they're going to have, how many buildings they've got, different network rollout costs and things. But normally there's nothing there really much on revenue. It's either just a very high level number that someone's made up, or some sort of linear projection based on last year's growth. And that's not really much good when you want to plan prices for the future. So what we find in telecoms anyway is that generally, like most high-tech things, it's a cycle, like an S-curve. So you start off with the early adopters, and you can often charge them quite high prices. And then you've got the growth phase in the middle. And then you've got the mature phase when the product's basically just finished and it's dying down. So where you are on this S-curve is very much important when you're looking at pricing different products and services. So I put a couple here. So 5G's in its early growth phase at the moment. That will be replaced for 6G soon, probably. Voice is pretty much reaching maturity, and SMS has been mature for years and years. So we take into account these type of S-curves and all the different products and services when we're doing the forecasting of the revenues. But there can be surprises. And this is one for SMS. I doubt if any of you use SMS now for talking to friends or things, but you'll find that it's used massively now for marketing. So people sending out what's called bulk SMSs to your phone. These can be for, buy this, or they can just be informational messages from the operators, or it can be authentication type things, codes for your bank and stuff like that. So just because products are old, and I put it here, SMS has been mature for 10 or 20 years. Actually, if you look at this projected growth here, it's found a completely new lease of life by being used in a completely different sense. So it's the same service, but instead of people generating the messages, it's computers generating the messages. And because this is a mature service, there's actually very little cost with it. So it's hugely profitable. This is one of the interesting things with telecoms. There's such a broad range of services, and the use of them can change so radically over a short period of time. And growth or mistakes is a mistake. And this is the most common thing we see, is that companies pushing as many products as they can to get as much revenue as quickly as they can, even if those products aren't going to be profitable in the long term. And in fact, some of them, like I've mentioned streaming here, streaming can seriously damage the network quality. That is, it can take up substantial bandwidth on particular cell sites, which means other people get poor quality reception or maybe can't even make calls at all. And yet, quite a few places we find streaming being pushed very heavily, which is the most unprofitable of all products in telecoms. So understanding the profitability of the services is important as well as just forecasting the revenue and the volumes. So the revenue forecast, it's a very simple formula. It's just the price times the volume. But both of these are very big question marks. So how do you price things over time? And then what's the volume of those services going to be? And there is a relationship between these, but it's quite hard to actually understand. The thing is to understand the profitability as well, so you can price the more profitable things more aggressively to encourage people to use the more profitable services, instead of just pricing everything as low as possible and getting volumes everywhere. So it's quite easy to get increased volumes. You simply reduce the price. But at some point, prices get down to almost zero. I expect you've all got bundles on your phone, and you don't really think about using out-of-bundle services, which is quite an old concept now. But what you've got to understand is that bundle that you get from the operator, it can be quite unprofitable depending on how you use that bundle. One operator I recently looked at, their international call business was very unprofitable. So international calls is where you call another country and the operator has to pay the operator in the other country to terminate that call. Now that cost is a variable cost. So every minute someone's making a call to another country, it's costing you, the operator, money. And in this case, what we found was that this product, the revenue was below the incremental cost. What that means is for every second or every minute people were calling abroad, the company was losing money, real money, variable money every minute, amounting to millions every month. And when we asked them why they did this, the only answer they could give us was because the competition's doing it. So not all revenue is good revenue, is we've got a saying. A classic example of that is if anyone's ever been roaming abroad to another country and you've come back home and then you found out you've got a very high bill, an unexpected bill when you arrive back home. that is what we call bad revenue. And what that does is that discourages people in the future when they're roaming to use products and services which they might otherwise use. And sorry, if there's any questions, please interrupt me. I see there's not too many people here, but. So the biggest challenge is finding the relationship between price and volume. So in other words, if I choose to reduce my prices, how is that going to impact my volumes? And it's a very simple formula. Well, it can be quite complicated if you look at the textbooks. But in practice, in telecoms, none of the classic formula work very well. But it's still, as a concept, just as real as any other industry. So if I reduce my cost of my data by 50%, will customers buy more data? And the elasticity of 1 means that if I drop my prices by 50%, customers will buy twice as much, so my revenues will stay the same. And the challenge is to find a price that you've got a positive number. So when I drop my prices, people buy more and my revenue actually goes up. And it doesn't always work. I've given one example here, reducing international voice. If you reduce this to 0, a lot of people might still not use it. People who understand how it works might, but a lot of people will just keep using their apps like WhatsApp or other ones that they got with Apple and things, because they prefer talking to their friends or relations that way, using a different medium than the international voice. So it's not just the question of understanding the price, but really understanding the customer behavior. There's no point reducing a product to almost 0 if the only people who are going to be using it are the people that are going to abuse it. So this might be people, for example, calling relatives in India or another third world country where they don't have large data bundles, and maybe it's cheaper overall for them to call their relatives in these third world countries, and racking up massive costs for the operator. So each one of the products and services, you really need to talk to the marketing team and understand, how customers use that product and service. Sorry, did you have a question? Now, typically what we find with the pricing strategy in a company is it's a very simple playbook. Basically, marketing first reduce prices, then they increase the bundle size until the bundle size gets so big no one will ever want anything else, like unlimited minutes, unlimited SMS, hundreds of gigabytes of data. But often they have to put together business cases for these pricing changes. And these business cases, if you look at them, they've always got positive cash flow. Otherwise, they will never get approved. And they're never normally reviewed afterwards. And if you were to add up the business cases, you'd find the company should be generating double, triple the revenues of what it actually is. So a lot of them are not worth the effort of actually doing them. And very rarely do they take into account profitability. So typically it's just short-term gain, so that the marketing guys can get their yearly bonus, not looking at the long-term strategy of the company. So a better pricing strategy is to understand the profitability first, and then push the more profitable services by reducing those prices or bundling things differently, or even increasing the prices of the services that are unprofitable. And a couple of examples here is bulk SMS, which I already mentioned, and messaging apps. Surprisingly, things like WhatsApp are actually very profitable because they don't actually use much of the network. It's mainly messaging. And when it's messaging, hardly any usage of the network's made at all. Whereas unprofitable ones like international voice, that has real variable costs associated with it. And streaming uses up massive amounts of network capacity. Now,
Mark,
in telecom,
Mark,
yes,
maybe just a quick question from my side.
Yeah.
On the previous
Thank you.
slides, how does the messaging and voice apps like WhatsApp generate profit? I mean, well, do they not connect as part of the package? Or?
Well, this is what people don't seem to realize is that when you buy a mobile phone package, right, a bundle, you know, maybe it's $100 a month or something. For that, you get data, you get voice, and you get SMS. And you, in Europe anyway, you often get some sort of roaming allowance bundled in as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the revenues you collect. But somehow, if you want to understand the services, you need to split those bundles down to the different services. And I've got a slide a bit later on this, but basically, you take the bundle. There's a method for doing this. You take the bundle revenue. Suppose you've got 100 gigs of data. What you do is you look at the services that are using that 100 gigs of data, and then you try and apportion some sort of value to those services. Now, the cost, if you're using data, is the same. So if it's 1 gigabyte of data, whether it's streaming or WhatsApp, the cost is the same. But they have different value to the customers. So for instance, WhatsApp, it's used a lot for messaging, and people value that a lot. Messaging uses hardly any data resources at all. So, you know, you could be chatting with your friends all day with WhatsApp messages, and it costs the telecoms companies hardly anything. But the customers value that a lot. Now, unprofitable ones like international voice, sorry.
No,
Sorry,
I
carry on.
understand. I understand now. I understand that you basically make a allocation of the total data that the customer buys to different services, and then you say, well, this is how much they will use for this specific service out of that bundle. I get that. Thank you.
Yes, and then you try and find some independent value for that service. Mm-hmm. So it could be an alternative service, or it could be something that competitors offering, or something that's standalone. But yeah, you try and find some more value for that. And then what you do is you multiply that value by the usage to get some sort of pseudo revenue. And then you divide that total bundle by those usages. Now, tracking the actual usage by apps is actually quite straightforward on the networks. Getting the value of those services is a bit more challenging, but it's quite a well understood method. It's been done for many years. But if you don't understand each of those services, then it's very hard to actually push different services. Now, the way you can do that with telecoms operators is what they can do. You might have noticed it on your bills, or you might not, but sometimes what they'll do is they'll say, oh, you've got 2 gigabytes of free. I put in inverted commas free because it's not. it's part of your bundle. But if you say you had 10 gigabyte bundle, they might give you 2 extra gigabytes to use with an app they're pushing, like WhatsApp or TikTok or something. So you actually get 12 gigabytes. Whereas if you use another app, then you'll use part of your 10 gigabytes. And because it's classified as free, customers seem to think it's free, so they tend to use it more. So there is ways of pushing different app usage with operators. But again, it's down to pricing and bundling of the services. And then you can get huge growth in those services if you do it the right way. And also, tell people that it's free when it's not actually free, it's a con. But that's what you tell the customers.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Now, streaming is the exact opposite. Streaming uses massive amounts of data, and that some apps you can have streaming and messaging on the same app. So this doesn't always work, but it works generally quite well. It's not just apps on your phone, but it might be visiting certain websites as well. For fixed operators and that as well. Basically trying to encourage customers to use more profitable services. Now, if the data is encrypted, and this is a bit more of a problem, then it's hard to know to separate those services out. So if it goes through a VPN, for example, then it's almost impossible to work out what data is actually being used for. So telecom operators hate VPNs, so I tend to use one quite a lot. That's me. And I mentioned about bundling things properly. But at the end of the day, it's really customers' preference. So if customers want to make fixed calls, to their older relatives abroad, then that's fine. Yeah, encourage that. If they want to use WhatsApp to talk to younger family members abroad, or in the same country or whatever, encourage that. So it's not just the application, but it's also your customer segment. Different segments have different needs and wants, and that needs understanding as well. But most of that is readily available in the data warehouses. It's not a problem getting that normally. The thing we're trying to do is discourage volumes that incur us a lot more cost than ones that don't. Now, spare capacity is a thing that comes up quite a lot in telecoms, and you wouldn't think it, but telecoms operators are rather like hotels and planes in some sense, in that it's a perishable resource. So if you don't sell it today, it's gone tomorrow. And someone taught marketing people this years ago, and they think, well, let's sell everything today and don't worry about tomorrow. My bonus is this year. So often the marketing guys will just sell everything regardless of cost, just so they can use up the spare capacity, which is again considered free because no one's using it, which in some senses is true, because if it's not used, rather like a spare aeroplane seat or spare hotel, you can't sell that empty hotel room from yesterday tomorrow. It's gone, finished. But unlike planes and hotels, telecoms is generally a recurring event. So if someone used that service today, they're likely to use it tomorrow and the day after and the day after. So you can't just purely treat it as free, because it will have impact in the future. It might not have an impact for a year or two, but it will eventually. Now, what happens with the network is when the network becomes full, you've got two things that happen. One, the quality of service goes down quickly for people, so you'll get dropped calls and data, or you won't be able to connect at all, or your streaming will become very slow. And if you need to increase that capacity, it's an extremely expensive business to do that, which is why it's important to take a long-term view of this, not a short-term view. Now, what telecoms, the telecoms air interface that mobile phones use, is what we call, and it's typo here, but it's a sparse resource, in that there's only so many radio frequencies that can be used, and everyone wants to use them. So unlike a manufacturing plant where you can go and build another factory, put lots of machines in it, this is a big limitation for telecoms companies. If you've used up all your allotted radio frequencies, you can't just go and buy more. You have to get licenses from the government to use those extra frequencies, and they might charge you a lot of money for those extra frequencies. You might even have to bid for them against other operators. So it can be an extremely expensive business. Even if you have enough available frequencies, if your existing equipment is full, so this is your radio stations, these are the things you'll see on towers and lamp posts and things like that around the place. What you can do is get congestion in a particular busy area. And just a few people streaming in that area can bring down the whole network for that area, where other people can't really make very good use of it. And the only solution there is to build more cell sites. Now, building cell sites means you've got to erect a new tower, you've got to get planning permission, you might have to rent the land. It's a very expensive process and very time consuming. It's not just something you do tomorrow. It has to be planned well in advance. So spare capacity is often treated as free, but it needs to be planned well. Otherwise, you can seriously damage the network in the future. Now, if the network does start experiencing bad quality because of overusage, people will start leaving that network. They'll go to one networks that have better coverage. So not only do you not get revenues for those services, but you can actually start damaging your existing revenues as well, which is why this long-term planning strategy is needed and very rarely done. Sorry, you're just not moving on. Hang on. And telecoms is quite famous for changing technology. So there's always a new technology on the horizon that will be better than the one before. Before I go through my list here, I'll mention a bad one that went badly wrong, and that is 5G. Now, many of you might have 5G on your phones, but if you go back a few, and you might like it, it might be fast, it's good, and it is. But if you go back a few years, all the forecasts for that were that it was going to generate huge amounts of new revenue for new services like self-driving cars and working in operating theaters to drive robots and lots of totally crazy ideas. None of those turned out to be true. So the telecoms operators invested an absolute fortune in 5G, and they got no new revenues from that at all. The only good thing about it is it did increase the capacity on the networks, which means they can offer more products and services over that network. But typically, the pricing policy is to offer more data in the bundles. So most of that investment, all the cost of building 5G, has been given away for free, and it's generated no extra revenues at all. So when you're planning these new products and services, you need to understand the technology and how it's going to be used in the future as well. So I've listed a couple down here. 10G fiber to the home. It's just becoming a reality over the last couple of years. Companies are slowly rolling it out. So within the next few years, you'll probably see the availability of 10 gigabits per second to your house. Why anyone would ever need that speed, I don't know, but it will be available. I mean, you could run a whole business on the 10G connection. Most people have about 100 megabits per second at the moment. So you're talking about 100 times increase in the speed of fiber. And actually, the rollout of that speed is actually relatively low cost. So it's actually an extremely good product. In fact, I'm working on a project looking at doing that at the very as we speak at the moment. And then we've got 5G mobile coming along in the next couple of years, which I expect will be the same sort of fiasco as 6G, which will probably be the same sort of thing as 5G. It'll probably be just slightly faster and more coverage. And an up and coming one, which is pretty old now, but if any of you ever worked in an office, you'll have a phone on your desk. Now that phone is connected to a local switch in your building, which typically your IT company run for you. So what those phones do is they route calls throughout your company, from office to office. But they also route calls off the network. So you can call people outside the company, call abroad, people can call you. It's a really old service. I mean, it goes back like 20 years. One of the new services is a thing called cloud PABXs, which is basically it's like a virtual network, a virtual private network. So it sits in the cloud. And what it will allow you to do is if you make a call from your desk, for example, to a colleague and he's not in the office, that call will be routed to his mobile phone, wherever he is, anywhere in the world, using the same number as his office phone. So if I dial, another office and the number's 123, I just type 123 and it will be routed all the way through to his mobile phone, no matter where he is in the world. He can call me back in my office using my number, 567, and talk to me directly, just like he was in the office. And all the roaming charges and normal things you would have when you're abroad, they're all free because this is all done over the cloud, over the internet. Now, almost every company in the world has got one of these switches in their offices, which they have to maintain, pay for. So that's, CapEx, OpEx. Virtually all of those will be scrapped in the near future with this new service, this cloud-based service. And it's also a lot more flexible as well. So one of the more profitable services for telecoms companies at the moment is business calls. So these calls in and out of offices, because businesses generally pay their bills on time and they don't really care too much about who's calling who. Most of that revenue will disappear in the next couple of years with these new technologies coming on board in the cloud. That's just a couple. I mean, there's a long list of these things, but that's one of the interesting things for the telecoms market. It's changing all the time. There's always new products and services coming out, which might replace old ones. So it'd be a substitute for an old service, but it might be delivered in a completely different way. So it makes it very fast moving and very interesting. Well, this was mentioned a bit more before, but dealing with bundles is one of the biggest challenges when looking at the revenue, because you might be charging your customer $100 a month, and that's all you see in the billing system. And somehow you have to calculate from that how much revenue is associated with the different products and services. And And this can get very confusing because there's two ways of doing this. There's the IFRS way, which basically says that's the volumes offered. So down example here, if I give you 100 gigabytes of data, the IFRS way will say that you get 100 gigabytes of revenue. The second way is you use the volumes or the usage. So in this case, I'm using 15 gigabytes of data. So it should be gigabytes, not megabytes. And I will only get 15 minutes worth of 15 gigabytes worth of revenue. So the difference between the two is massive. One gets 100 and one gets 15. Most, if not all, financial reporting systems in companies use the IFRS way. And the IFRS way is not suitable for profitability or pricing. Now, where we first came across this was a couple of years ago. And it was during COVID. And what we found out was that the profitability of roaming, so roaming is where you go abroad, which is, a big thing in Europe. And we found the profitability of roaming went up massively during COVID, when almost no one was roaming, which didn't make any sense to us at all, because everyone was staying at home. Yet this product, the revenues went up massively, but the volumes went down massively. So both in totally different directions. And then we found out that this new IFRS rule had been introduced by the finance department, and they'd failed to tell anyone in pricing or in marketing. They just reintroduced this new way of doing revenue analysis. So the point I'm getting here is that you could have a financial report that says a product is very profitable, but in reality, that product could be very unprofitable. Unless you do this analysis properly in the right way, your existing financial reports can be extremely misleading. And if management follow these reports, which they probably do, without being informed of this, they can start making the wrong decisions. Now, if anyone's more interested in how this works, I could spend an hour explaining how this goes together. But the point to make here is that doing this revenue stuff is a lot more complicated than people think. And what you often get reported by finance is misleading, very misleading, especially if you want to set new products, set new prices for products and services. So really, what is needed is a big combination of things. You need to understand where the technology is going in the next few years, and the engineers are very good at this. Even though they don't care about revenue, don't care about customers, they care about new technology. So these are the guys to speak to. And this, you get a hint of where this is if you look at any budgeting or forecasting costs from finance, you'll have CapEx numbers, so capital expenditure. And from that, you can get an idea of what the engineers want to invest in the next few years. And then the future OpEx, this is generally pretty much straightforward. How many staff are you going to employ in the next few years? Most finance budgeting plans there are spot on. There's almost nothing to needed at all. And then a forecast of these future prices and volumes. This is the hard bit when you're doing profitability. Cost is very straightforward, almost, just ABC as the tools are called. It's pretty been done for the last 10 or 20 years. It's pretty routine. Whereas the forecasting the prices and volumes is really difficult. And the last point here is really the biggest problem. It not only depends on what the technology is going to be, but the customer preferences and the competition. So different segments of your customers might prefer different applications. So older ones might want Facebook, younger ones might want TikTok. So even across different customer segments, you can't necessarily price and treat things exactly the same. So the best people to talk to this about is marketing, to try and understand the customers better. Often marketing will run market surveys, just take samples of customers and ask them what they're doing, what they want next, and things like that. So you can see that this solution really involves all three of the legs that I mentioned earlier. Technology people about where things are going, financial people about where they're investing, and the marketing people about what the customer wants. So again, just coming back to emphasize, the prices and the volumes is the hard bit when doing the profitability, not the costs. Now, when we talk to marketing about this, they are extremely reluctant to accept that you should do pricing based on profitability. I think partly it's historic. They've been given bad cost models in the past. The cost models are too old. They're historic. The last year's costs, no use for this year. Just endless excuses. And that's all they are, is excuses, I think. It is doable. It's just harder, that's all, than maybe they've experienced in the past. Now, if the company has an existing cost model, a historic cost model, generally they are quite quick to update. It's not a particularly difficult thing. And basically what you do is you add in the budgets and the forecasts from finance, and then do the revenue and the price and volumes forecasts to get the revenues. Now, what we find helps a lot is there's not one answer to this. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. A new app could come along that we've never heard about. So trying out lots of different what-if scenarios. So try out different crazy pricing policies, different price elasticities, different effects of the competition. Just run dozens and dozens of these scenarios and see what profitability results you get. And that helps you sort of target the more profitable areas. So it's not one solution. It's try out lots of different ideas, speaking to different people, and see what might happen. Then just try out all the different strategies and see what the model results give you. Sorry, I put it down. I put it wrong down here. I put most software solutions deal with this very well. Sorry, the exact opposite. Most existing software solutions don't deal with this very well. So if you've got a costing solution and you say, I want to try out 20 or 30 different pricing strategies with it, they'll probably tell you, oh, we've got to build 20 or 30 different models. Again, this is just not true. There are solutions to this. We often do it in Excel. So again, it's people making excuses really not to do this. But it is possible, it is doable. People do it. And then coming on to the final parts, linking to individual customers is very beneficial, because if you've got high-level segmentation, it's quite difficult to see how your different prices, when you change them, have worked historically. So you can look at historic trends of different products and services So, for example, go back 2 years and look at what the take-up of TikTok was with different segments, and then say, what if a new product like TikTok came along tomorrow? Maybe it would follow a similar sort of trend, and use that. But without having individual customer level data, this is quite hard to do, because a lot of segments, if they're high level, they're fixed, and you can't dive in and see and break them down different ways. So it's very beneficial to have individual customer profitability, to do analysis with historic data. And historic data, this is not costs, this is different price volume trends that have happened in the past. Can be very helpful when you're doing the analysis. And then once you've got this, you can start segmenting customers based on profitability. So we did this for a big company a few years back. And what we found was, using their existing segmentation, we found some clusters of customers who were in the same segments, who were very unprofitable, and other customers who were very profitable. And then what we did is we dived in, and because we had individual customer profitability, we managed to dive in and break those down, and to find out and to group those customers by profitability. And what we found out, it was mobility that was the key thing. How much the customers moved around. So if the customers were mainly located in the local area, or if they traveled around the country a lot, or if they traveled abroad a lot, they tended to be more profitable, even if they were in the same segments. And then what was suggested is to sub-segment all these customers by mobility, and then target some of these new services at customers who are more mobile. And they actually launched a marketing campaign based on this, and they put in business class on British Airways, this was a few years ago, when a lot of people were commuting around Europe, they put little pamphlets on everyone's breakfast trays in business class, explaining how different new products and services could be used when traveling. And that helped increase profitability without any real extra cost, no network cost, just the small marketing cost of targeting particular customers in a particular area, just by sub-segmenting the data based on profitability, opposed to the traditional revenue or other types of segments. But to do this, you do need customer level data in your data warehouse. Sorry, I skipped over one then. So I just get to the next one. Almost finished. And this sort of repeats what I said on the last one. If you can identify which one of those customers are profitable or unprofitable, individual customers that is, and then you can do individual targeting marketing at those customers, which could be outbound calls to those customers saying, why don't you try out this new products and services? Or it could be targeting bulk SMS messages to customers. The important thing is here, if you don't do a broad marketing campaign and target everybody in the same segment, also, which can be quite expensive, you do targeted marketing at just the customers that you want to pick up the service. I put bonuses here, but what I mean by that in sense is you might offer, like I mentioned earlier, again, free data bundles for particular applications, not forever, but maybe introductory, say for the next 3 months, TikTok for example, will be free for you. And that could be targeted at a new platform, which is just up and coming because you want to encourage your customers to use it. That is the best way of getting customers to pick up new products and services, is to offer these so-called free data usage, especially with younger people. So almost finished. Just a few final points is the cost models, where most people focus their effort, is actually normally the easiest bit. The revenue needs to be calculated using the usage rules, not the way finance do it, the IFRS rules, which is the way almost all operators do it currently. And then pricing needs to be targeted, particular individual customer groups, to get the most out of the profitability. And then once you've got that, you can segment based on profitability as well as all your other existing segments. And finally, the main objective here is to increase the profitability by generating more revenue, not necessarily by reducing costs, but actually generating more revenue. So that was all I had to say today. Thank you for listening. Not many questions, but I hope you learned a couple of new things. The next time you use your mobile phone, you might think twice about what you're doing with it.
So thank you, Mark. And are there any questions from anyone else on the call? I mean, this is Mark covered a lot of great information.
Can you hear me, Rafe?
Yes.
Yeah, Gary Kokens. Hey, Mark.
Oh, hi, Gary. Hi.
You and I are both Deloitte alumni, I think.
Yes, I know. Yeah. And a couple of other places like SAS as well. But yeah.
A typical question I always have is, what has been one major lesson learned by people struggling to apply the techniques you're talking about?
Well, it's repeated over and over again, is that they ignore profitability until the company is losing money or it's not very profitable. And the case I gave earlier about a company who was losing money on international calls, not virtual money like using the network, but real variable money that you have to pay out every month to other operators. They were unprofitable as a business. And they didn't start looking at profitability until they were unprofitable. And it's too late then. Once your customers get used to low prices, it's very, very hard to get them to pay more. So once you've done this, it's like a big hole you've dug for yourself. It's very, very difficult to get out of that hole. Companies need to look at profitability when they're profitable, when they're generating large amounts of revenue, and take a long-term view of it, not just the next year for my bonuses. Take a strategic view over the next 3 to 5 years, and try and plan the direction of the business, not just wait until it's too late. And then you get a new CEO, and first thing he says is, "Oh, we need to look at profitability." And it's too late, and people don't learn. I've been talking about this stuff like you, Gary, for 20 years. Same message. I mean, some people have learned, of course, but a lot haven't. It's a shame, really, isn't it? I mean,
many years ago, way back when after Deloitte, I worked for a few years for ABC Technologies, which was an activity-based costing software vendor.
No, Oris was one of my favorite software tools.
And at that time, there were only 2 commercial vendors. There was Armstrong Lang with Medify in the UK, what we observed was the prospects that came to purchase ABC software, we referred to them as the ox carts in a ditch. They were stuck in the mud. And
I haven't heard that before,
and the problem they had was their sales were increasing, but their profits margins were declining and the CFO could not explain why. And of course, as we now know, what's happening is the sales force is selling more and more of unprofitable products or services or to unprofitable customers. So the more they sold, the more you lost money, but they didn't have the facts. So that was our ox carts in the ditch analogy.
Exactly what I just told you about this example where they're selling international calls at a loss. I mean, that's variable cost loss. That doesn't include all the network costs.
I have an 11 o'clock call, Rafe and Mark. I'm going to need to scoot. So thank you, Mark, for another dazzling, informative presentation. We'll keep in touch.
Right. Thanks for joining in.
Right.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, that discussion just shows how universal these concepts are. I mean, it's not just telecom. It's, as Gary said, applicable to every industry, and there's so much potential for any company to apply these concepts and dramatically increase its profitability. So I think we're out of time, and thank you, Mark, again for an incredibly informative session. I think we all found it informative, and look forward to our next session.